Ren Calloway learned a long time ago that silence was safer than truth. In the Blackthorn pack, silence kept her alive. Truth had only ever gotten her hurt. 3 years had passed since the night everything changed. Everyone still remembered the accusation, even if most of the details had blurred with time and gossip. The Beta's son had died in the training woods, and somehow, without evidence beyond whispers and convenient timing, the blame had landed on Ren. She had been 17, she had been terrified, and she had been alone, because the moment her name was tied to the tragedy, every friend she had ever known stepped back like she was something contagious. Now she was 24, and the pack still treated her like she carried a disease. She lived on the edge of Blackthorn territory in a small cabin that leaked when it rained, took the jobs no one else wanted, and kept her eyes down whenever a higher-ranked wolf passed her on the path. Omega was the lowest rank in the pack, but even Omegas were usually shown basic courtesy. Ren was shown none. She had grown used to it the way a person gets used to a stone in their shoe, not because it stops hurting, but because complaining never made it go away. What no one knew, what Ren had hidden even from herself for years, was that something old and strange lived inside her. Her grandmother used to tell her stories about a bloodline gift passed down through generations, a voice that could command wolves the way an alpha commanded a pack, but rarer and far more dangerous to reveal. Her grandmother always said the gift chose its moment. Ren had spent years hoping it would simply choose to stay hidden forever. Being ordinary, even a hated ordinary, felt safer than being extraordinary in a pack that had already decided she was dangerous. Everything changed on the day the Alpha King came to Blackthorn territory. Alpha King Draven Ashcroft ruled over the coalition of allied packs that kept the region stable, and his visits were rare enough that the entire pack turned out to prepare. Ren was assigned to the kitchens, chopping vegetables and hauling water, well out of sight of the ceremonies where the Beta and his family would greet their honored guest. That suited her fine. She had no interest in Alpha Kings or Grand Alliances. She wanted to finish her work and disappear back to her cabin before dark. The attack came without warning. A rival pack, one that had been probing Blackthorn's borders for months, chose the exact moment of the king's visit to strike. Howls tore through the afternoon air, followed by the crash of bodies through the tree line and the sharp, panicked shouts of pack members scrambling for weapons. Ren dropped the knife she had been using and ran toward the sound before she even decided to. It was instinct, not courage. Later she would wonder if there was truly a difference. She found herself in the clearing near the eastern fence, where a group of enemy wolves had broken through and were closing in on a cluster of pack members who had nothing left to fight with. Among them, she realized with a jolt of panic, stood the Alpha King himself, separated from his guard, his sword arm bleeding, facing down 3 wolves alone. Ren had no weapon, she had no rank, no training that mattered here, nothing but her own body between danger and the people trapped in that clearing. And so, without thinking, without any plan at all, she opened her mouth and screamed a single word into the chaos. Kneel. The word left her chest with a force she had never felt before, vibrating through the ground itself. Every wolf in that clearing, enemy and ally alike, dropped to their knees as if their legs had simply stopped answering to them. The silence that followed was so complete that Ren could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She stood there, shaking, staring at rows of kneeling wolves who moments ago had been snarling and lunging at each other. Her own pack members knelt too, confused and frightened, glancing between her and the king as if waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold still. Draven Ashcroft rose first, slowly, his eyes fixed on Ren with an intensity that made her want to run and hide all over again. He was not looking at her with fear or suspicion, the way she had expected. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a puzzle piece they had been searching for, without knowing it was missing. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying easily across the clearing. "And why has no one told me about you?" Ren opened her mouth, but no words came. She was an Omega. She was the girl blamed for a boy's death. She was nobody, and yet an Alpha King was staring at her like she had just rewritten everything he thought he understood about power. The Beta arrived moments later, breathless and pale, and quickly began explaining that the enemy wolves had been repelled, that the pack was safe, that everything was under control. He did not once mention Ren, did not once acknowledge what every wolf in that clearing had just witnessed. But Draven was not so easily distracted. "That command," Draven said, cutting through the beta's rambling. "I felt it in my bones. That is not a low-ranked gift. That is not even an ordinary alpha's gift. Who trained her?" The beta stammered that no one had trained her, that she was an omega, a nobody, that surely the king was mistaken about what he had seen. "I am not mistaken," Draven said. "I have led wolves for 15 years. I know exactly what I felt kneel me to the ground for half a second before my own will caught up. Bring her to the pack hall tonight. I want answers." That evening, for the first time in 3 years, Ren was allowed inside the pack hall as something other than a servant. She stood near the back, feeling the weight of every stare, some curious, most still hostile. The beta's family sat rigid near the front, their faces carefully blank in a way that struck Ren as strange. She had learned to read fear in people who had wronged her, and she saw it now, buried under practiced calm. Draven asked her directly, in front of the gathered pack, where her ability had come from. Ren, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard, told the truth. She spoke of her grandmother, of the old bloodline stories, of a gift she had never asked for, and had spent years trying to bury so deep it would never surface again. "Why hide something like this?" Draven asked, though something in his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "Because the last time people thought I was different," Ren said, "they decided different meant dangerous, and dangerous meant guilty." The hall went silent. Draven's expression shifted, sharpening into something Ren couldn't quite name. He turned to the beta's family and asked, quite simply, what exactly Ren had been guilty of. The story came out slowly, painfully, the same story Ren had heard 100 times before. 3 years ago, the beta's son had died during a training exercise in the woods. Ren had been the last person seen near him. There had been no witnesses, no real evidence, only suspicion, and the desperate need of a grieving family to have somewhere to place their pain. Draven listened to all of it without interrupting. When it was finished, he asked one question that made the entire hall go still. If there was no evidence, why was she never given a proper trial? Why was a 17-year-old girl simply cast out on the word of a grieving family, with no investigation at all? No one had an answer that satisfied him. Draven announced, in front of the entire pack, that he would be personally reviewing the case, and that until it was resolved, Ren Calloway would be under his protection, free from any further punishment or exile. That decision did not sit well with everyone. In the days that followed, Ren felt the tension in the pack shift into something sharper and more dangerous than simple dislike. She caught members of the beta's family watching her with expressions that made her skin crawl. Small things began to go wrong. Rumors spread that her power was unstable, that she had lost control during the attack, and nearly harmed her own pack members, instead of saving them. Someone spread word that she had been seen using her voice on pack wolves in the training yard, forcing them to fight against their will, though no such thing had happened. Draven, to Ren's surprise, did not simply dismiss these rumors. He investigated each one personally, and each one crumbled under scrutiny. He began spending time near her, not out of suspicion, but because he seemed genuinely interested in understanding her, in learning who she was beneath the years of isolation and blame. Ren found herself, cautiously, and against her own better judgment, beginning to trust him. "You didn't have to believe me," she told him one evening, as they stood near the training grounds where the attack had taken place. "Most people don't." "Most people are afraid of what they don't understand," Draven said. "I've spent my life leading wolves who are afraid of losing power. You've spent yours being punished for having power you never asked for. Those are different kinds of fear, but I know which one I trust more." It was Draven who finally uncovered the truth. Digging through old records and quietly speaking with pack members who had never been asked to testify 3 years earlier, he found an elder who had seen something that night in the woods, but had been too afraid to speak up. The beta's son had died in an accident, a fall from unstable rocks, during an unsanctioned solo training session he had been forbidden from attempting. Ren had found his body and tried to help him, but by the time others arrived, the story had already been twisted into something else, shaped by grief, and the family's need to blame someone rather than face the truth. Draven called for a formal trial, the kind Ren should have received 3 years earlier. The entire pack gathered once more in the hall. The elder who had witnessed the truth was brought forward, and though fear still shook his voice, he told what he had seen. The Beta's family, cornered and desperate, tried one final time to twist the story, insisting the elder was mistaken, that Ren had somehow manipulated him. It was in that moment, with the whole pack watching, that Ren felt something rise in her again, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. She was tired of hiding. She was tired of being small. She turned to the Beta's wife, the one who had first spread the accusation, and let her voice carry, not as a scream this time, but as something quieter and far more absolute. Tell them the truth. The words moved through the hall like a current. The Beta's wife's composure cracked entirely, and through tears, she admitted what she had done. She had known, deep down, that the story didn't add up, but grief had made her desperate for someone to blame, and Ren, quiet and powerless in the pack's eyes, had been an easy target. The truth, once spoken aloud under a command that could not be faked or denied by pack law, could not be taken back. Ren was formally exonerated that night. The pack that had spent 3 years treating her like something to be scraped off their boots, now watched her with a very different kind of attention, equal parts shame and awe. Draven stood beside her as the announcement was made, and when he took her hand in front of the entire hall, no one dared to whisper a single word against it. In the weeks that followed, Ren was given a new place within the pack, not as an Omega hidden at its edges, but as someone recognized for the rare and powerful gift she carried. She trained others to control what she had spent years suppressing, teaching them that power did not have to mean cruelty, that a command could be an act of protection rather than domination. Draven asked her, quietly and without ceremony, if she would consider standing beside him as more than an ally. Not because of what she could do, he told her, but because of who she had chosen to be, even after everyone had tried to convince her she was worthless. Ren said yes. The pack that had once called her their most hated Omega now watched her walk through their halls with her head held high, no longer afraid of what she might say, but grateful for the truth she had finally been allowed to speak. She had spent years believing that silence was the price of survival, standing now beside a king who had seen her worth before the rest of the world caught up. She understood at last that some truths were worth every risk it took to finally let them be heard.